"Enjoy the view, Vivian," my daughter-in-law sneered as she shoved me over the rail. The Pacific swallowed my scream. My son, Adrian, didn't even flinch. His smile was the final betrayal. Together they thought they'd erased me, along with the $3 billion fortune my late husband left behind. But that evening, when they returned to the Los Angeles estate they had already claimed as their own, I was waiting in the velvet armchair Robert and I had chosen decades earlier, alive, dry, and holding something that would end them. Let me take you back to how an ordinary Friday in 2022 unraveled into the fight of my life. At 70, I should have known better. I'd seen enough boardroom coups in Robert's aerospace empire to recognize ambition. Still, I clung to the illusion that blood carried loyalty. When Adrian called me that morning himself, not through a secretary inviting me on a celebration cruise, I wanted to believe. "Mother, we should toast your birthday properly," he said. The warmth in his tone blinded me to the malice beneath. I wore my cream shawl, the one Robert had gifted me in Rome, and let their driver take me down to the Marina del Rey harbor. Adrian stood at the dock, arms wide, the perfect son for onlookers. Beside him, his wife Isabella held a champagne flute, her smile too practiced. The yacht gleamed under California sunlight, 50 feet of arrogance paid for with money I had loaned them. Money that never touched any startup account as promised. Adrian bragged about Caribbean trips. Isabella chattered about remodeling their Bel Air mansion, which was still listed under my name. For an hour, the air smelled of salt and citrus, and I almost believed this was family. Then the questions came, Adrian's casual probes about the will, Isabella's syrup-coated suggestions that perhaps simplifying the trust would save me worry, each word scraped against my bones. When Isabella's hands pressed into my back and the ocean swallowed me, I learned the truth. My son had chosen greed over blood. But what they didn't know was that Robert, paranoid genius that he was, had left me more than money. He left me leverage, files stored where only I could reach them. And that's exactly what Adrian and Isabella found waiting in my lap when they walked through the door that night. "It's just that probate can be so complicated, Mother," Adrian said, topping off my champagne with a little too much enthusiasm. "We want to make sure everything's handled." That's when I noticed Isabella angling her phone. Not openly, but slyly, pretending to snap selfies while the camera caught me sipping, talking about finances, anything that could be twisted later into evidence. The pieces slid together with cruel precision. The surgery I'd endured, my hip replacement, had been their excuse to help with paperwork. The power of attorney forms they'd slid in front of me at the hospital, swearing it was temporary, the sudden silence from my financial advisor. I set my glass down. "Adrian," I said carefully, "I'd like to return to shore." His face hardened. The mask dropped. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Mother." His voice was colder now, like steel on glass. "We need to discuss your health, your memory." "Memory issues?" My laugh was sharp. "I'm sharper than both of you combined." Isabella stepped closer, smug. "We've documented everything. The doctors agree you're no longer fit to manage your estate." "That's absurd," I snapped. But even as I spoke, I realized how carefully they had staged it. The yacht was miles from Marina del Rey, the coastline a thin shadow. No witnesses, just the three of us, the sea, and their scheme. "Mother, we're trying to help," Adrian said smoothly, but his eyes were glacial. "We can do this the easy way, or the hard way." Pain throbbed in my hips, but my mind was clear. "And if I refuse?" That's when Isabella smiled for real, the first true expression she'd shown all day. "Well, elderly woman, recent surgery, probably took too many pills, lost her balance at sea." She gave a little shrug. "Tragic accidents happen all the time." I stared at my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the man whose tuition I'd paid, whose wedding I had funded. Now he nodded along as his wife plotted my death. "You're insane if you think this will work." "Actually," Adrian replied, pulling out a folder, "we've planned this carefully. Sign these papers, transferring control of your assets for your own protection, and we'll all go home happy." I looked at the papers, at Isabella's phone still recording, at the endless Pacific stretching around us, and I realized something chilling. The ocean terrified me less than my own blood. I straightened. My voice didn't shake. "Go to hell." That was when Isabella slipped behind me and whispered about the Pacific sharks. The shove wasn't violent, they were too clever for that. Just a sudden nudge when I was off balance, leaning over the rail to look at the glittering water. Over I went, cream shawl and all, into the cold Pacific off Santa Catalina. As I hit the water, I heard Adrian shouting, "Mother Godmother," but beneath it came Isabella's lower voice, on the phone. "Yes, file the emergency petition first thing Monday," she said. "She's clearly not competent to." The ocean closed over my head, and suddenly their betrayal was the least of my problems. I'd always been a strong swimmer. Robert and I had done our laps every morning, even in winter, but the cold punched the breath from me, and my clothes dragged me down. Kicking off my shoes, I broke the surface, gasping just in time to see the yacht speeding away. They were actually leaving me there to die. That's when I spotted the fishing trawler. Captain Jake Morales was exactly the sort of man who'd leap into deep water for a stranger. 62, skin weathered from decades at sea, possessed of the kind of moral compass my own family lacked. "Holy hell, lady, what happened to you?" he barked as he and his teenage granddaughter Maya hauled me aboard. I was shivering so hard I could barely form words. Jake wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of salt and diesel while Maya started the engine. My family," I managed between chattering teeth. "We saw them take off like a bat out of hell," Jake said grimly. "Didn't look back once. What kind of people abandon someone in open water? The kind who stand to inherit $3 billion if I disappear," I thought, but out loud I said only, "The kind who aren't really family." Jake radioed the Coast Guard while Maya wrapped another blanket around me. "This is the Maria Elena," he said. "We've got a woman about 12 miles off Catalina. She's conscious but needs medical attention." "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "Please don't tell them you found me." "Not yet." Jake studied my face with sharp eyes that knew when someone was fleeing more than cold water. "You? In some kind of trouble?" "Yes," I breathed, steady now. "But not the kind you're thinking. I need to get to shore without anyone knowing I survived. Can you help me?" Maya looked at her grandfather. "Grandpa, shouldn't we?" "Should and shouldn't are funny things," Jake said slowly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like following the rules," Jake muttered, keying the radio again. "Coast Guard, this is Molly Sue. False alarm on that rescue. Turned out to be debris. All clear." As we ran toward a tiny private dock he knew, I told them everything. Adrian and Isabella, the money, the hospital papers, the way my advisor had gone silent. Jake listened without interruption. Jake steered with the practiced calm of someone who'd spent his whole life watching the sea do what it does. When I finished, Jake's jaw tightened. "So they figured they'd rather be rich orphans than broke kids with a living mother," he said flatly. "Apparently so. What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What would I do now that, for all intents and purposes, I was officially dead to my son and his wife? They'd sail home, report me missing, don their grieving faces and put the wheels in motion. Emergency petitions, hospital notes, a quick probate that favored them. The law, curated by people with money and ambition, would bend into the shape they wanted. But death, fake death, gives you options you don't have when you're alive. I surprised myself by speaking with a calm that didn't feel like mine. "I'm going to let them think they won," I said, "and then I'll destroy them." Jake grinned, the kind of grin earned over decades of honest work. "Now that's a plan," he said. Jake dropped me at a cove with a dock so small it could be missed if you blinked. Mrs. Chen's bed and breakfast looked like it belonged in a different century paint, peeling in sentimental places, a wind chime that sang like someone's forgotten lullaby. The woman who opened the door was short and fierce, and old enough to have buried 3 husbands and still laugh about it. She ladled broth without a question and never asked for ID. "Long as you don't bring trouble to my door," she said, "you can sleep here. Cash only. No paperwork. No prying. Perfect." That evening, while my son and his wife were presumably filing reports and polishing their act of mourning, I sat at Mrs. Chen's kitchen table in a sweater that wasn't mine and made a list. Jake agreed to be my eyes and ears at the marina. He'd watch the yacht, listen for conversations, note comings and goings. He could tail them without looking like a tail. "What I can't figure out," I told him between sips of broth, "is how they intended to make it stick. Even with a tragic accident, there are investigations. They'd need more than forged signatures." "They had to have someone on the inside," Jake said slowly. "A lawyer, a bank clerk, someone who could grease the paperwork. Someone inside. The word tasted like iron. I closed my eyes and let the cove's damp air steady me. If they'd thought to plant an insider, then my next move had to be surgical. Root the betrayer out, gather proof, and then publicly pull the plug on the life they'd assumed was theirs. Outside, the night pressed in. Inside, my plan began to take shape. Patience, observation, and a slow, certain undoing. That night, in Mrs. Chen's little kitchen, I made a list. Everyone who'd had access to my financial life since Robert died. My lawyer, my accountant, my financial advisor, the private bank managers, the trust officers. Someone had been feeding Adrian and Isabella information, smoothing their way. Someone inside, and I would find out who. First, though, I needed to see what story they were telling about my death, Mrs. Chen's old desktop whirred like a tractor as I scrolled through headline after headline. Prominent aerospace widow lost at sea. Tragic boating accident claims the life of Vivian Mercer. The articles painted me as a confused old woman. Adrian was quoted extensively, his grief carefully scripted. Mother's memory had been slipping, he said. We were so worried about her safety. Isabella's tears gleamed in photographs as she described how Mother had wandered the deck moments before vanishing. They'd even included a photograph me at Adrian's birthday last year, holding a glass of wine, looking slightly bewildered. I remembered that evening perfectly. It was supposed to be a quiet dinner. Instead, I'd walked into 20 strangers in my old home. My confusion had been genuine, but only because no one had told me it was a party. In the article, though, I looked frail, lost, exactly the image they wanted. There was even an obituary online. Vivian Mercer, beloved mother and philanthropist, passed away during a boating excursion with her devoted family. In lieu of flowers, please donate to the Alzheimer's Association. Even in death, they were cementing the narrative of my supposed decline. Bastards, I muttered, shutting the laptop. Mrs. Chen glanced up from her knitting. Planning something special for them? Oh yes, I said softly. Something very special indeed. The funeral drew more people than I expected for a woman allegedly sliding into dementia. Hidden behind a maintenance shed at Westwood Memorial Park, binoculars borrowed from Jake's tackle box pressed to my eyes, I watched my own burial. Adrian had spared no expense premium casket, elaborate flowers, a glossy program with my smiling face. He and Isabella stood side by side in coordinated black, receiving condolences. What struck me most was how genuinely sad some mourners looked. Eleanor from next door was crying. My old book club lined the path. Even Dr. Torres, who'd replaced my hip, looked shaken. They cared. And my son was drinking in their sympathy. See anything interesting? Jake whispered beside me. Besides my son's Oscar-worthy performance? I lowered the binoculars. Look at who's not here. Jake adjusted his binoculars. Like who? My financial advisor, Richard Barnes. My lawyer, Patricia Walsh. My accountant, Michael Torres, I said, lowering my own lenses. The pieces clicked into place. People who should have been at my funeral, professionals who never missed a client's service, were conspicuously absent. $3 billion on the line, and not one of them showed. Maybe they're busy with paperwork for the estate, Jake offered. Or maybe, I murmured, they can't look anyone in the eye while they're part of this scheme. After the service, I watched Adrian and Isabella work the crowd like seasoned politicians, hugging, shaking hands, offering rehearsed lines of grief. But I noticed how quickly they cut off anyone who pressed too hard about my final days. They didn't want details. They wanted narrative control. That afternoon, Jake drove me back to Mrs. Chen's in his old pickup, weaving through side streets to avoid recognition. I had been officially dead for 4 days, and I was beginning to appreciate the peculiar advantages. I need to get into my old house, I told him as we pulled into the driveway. He frowned. That's dangerous. They're probably staying there now. Not according to property records, I said, pulling out a folded printout. They've kept their own place. My house is listed as empty since I moved to the condo last year. But here's the strange part. Someone's been paying the utilities. Electricity, water, gas, even landscaping. Jake scratched his chin. Why pay to maintain a place if no one's living there? Exactly, and I think it's time I found out. That night, he dropped me 3 blocks from the Bel Air home where I had lived with Robert for 35 years. The house where I had raised Adrian, hosted Christmas dinners, and foolishly signed the deed over to my son, thinking family meant permanence. It was past midnight. The street was silent but for the occasional car. My hand shook as I pulled out my old key. Adrian had never thought to ask for it back. Slipping around to the back door, I entered like a burglar into my own former life. The house felt wrong. Not empty, but unsettled. Sheets covered the old furniture, yet there were new additions. A leather sofa, worth more than most people's cars, an oversized entertainment system I'd never owned. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. Inside, I found not dusty condiments, but fresh food, imported cheeses, organic vegetables, bottles of expensive wine. This wasn't storage. Someone was living here. But it was the Study Roberts' old sanctuary at the back of the house where I found what I had really come for. The big oak desk, once neatly arranged with fountain pens and model planes, was now buried under documents, legal papers, financial statements, and most damning of all, a stapled dossier labeled Project Vivian. My own name turned into a code name for my erasure. I photographed everything with the disposable camera Jake had given me, my hands trembling with rage as I flipped through the pages. They had been at this for more than a year. Each section mapped out incidents that they themselves had engineered, doctor visits where they'd coached me to act confused, social settings arranged to make me appear disoriented. That birthday photo in the newspaper? They had deliberately hidden that it was a surprise party so they could catch me looking bewildered. The medication mix-up that sent me to the ER 3 months ago? They had switched my pill bottles. Every slip, every wobble, every instance of forgetfulness had been staged, documented, and framed as evidence of dementia. The most chilling item was a typed memo from someone signed only MT. Timeline needs to be accelerated. Vivian is asking too many questions about the power of attorney. If she goes to an outside lawyer, everything collapses. Move to Phase 3 within 2 weeks. Phase 3, according to their own notes, was my death. I had just photographed the last page when a car door slammed outside, headlights swept across the front windows, voices drifted closer. Adrian and Isabella returning from their grief performance. I gathered my things and moved for the back door. Through the walls, their conversation floated clear as glass. "Think Mrs. Peterson bought it?" Adrian asked. "She was crying too hard to think straight," Isabella replied. "What's she going to do, investigate? Mother fell off a boat. It happens. What about the will? Probate opens Monday. MT says we'll have full access to the accounts within 6 weeks." I slipped out into the garden, my heart hammering, but then I froze. A baby was crying inside my former home. Adrian and Isabella had never mentioned a child. As I crouched behind the rose bushes I'd planted 20 years ago, listening to the infant's wail, I realized this wasn't just about my fortune. This was about something far bigger. Jake pulled up at the corner 15 minutes later, headlights low. I was still trembling as I climbed into his truck. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Worse," I murmured, fastening my seatbelt. "I've seen my replacement." As he steered us back toward Mrs. Chen's, I told him everything: the baby, the forged documents, the mysterious MT, who seemed to be orchestrating the whole scheme. "A baby?" Jake repeated slowly. "They never mentioned having a kid. Not once. Adrian always said he and Isabella weren't ready, that they were too focused on their careers." I pulled the disposable camera from my bag. "I need these developed, but not at any chain where they might have friends." Jake nodded. "I know a guy up in Ventura. Old 1-hour shop. Doesn't ask questions." We drove there before dawn. While we waited for the pictures, we sat in his truck outside a shuttered diner, drinking burnt gas station coffee and trying to piece together the puzzle. "They've been at this over a year," Jake said, scanning my handwritten notes. "Systematically making you look incompetent, documenting everything, getting someone inside your financial team. And now a baby. Either they've been lying about having children or the baby isn't theirs," I finished. Jake turned to me. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," I said quietly. "If they're stealing my fortune, they'd want a legitimate heir, someone with my bloodline, a built-in claim. But if Isabella wasn't pregnant..." Jake's brow furrowed. "You think they stole a baby?" "I think they did something," I said. "And I think MT is the key to what?" "Ugh." When the photos came back an hour later, they were devastating. Crystal clear evidence of a year-long conspiracy, fake medical notes, coaching scripts, financial projections showing exactly how they planned to spend my money. But the last photo stopped me cold. A birth certificate tucked under the other papers. Baby Mercer, born 3 weeks ago. Mother, Isabella Mercer. Father, Adrian Mercer. I had been on that yacht with Isabella 4 days ago. She hadn't just given birth. This certificate is fake, I told Jake, completely fabricated. So whose baby is it? He asked. That night I lay awake in Mrs. Chen's guest room staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down. My son and his wife had tried to erase me, and now they had a baby they were hiding from the world. By morning, my mind was made up. Over breakfast I told Jake, I'm going back, but not to the house. I told Jake the next morning, I'm going to follow them. That's dangerous as hell, Vivian. If they see you, they won't. I cut him off. As far as they know, I'm fish food. I spread a local map across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. Look, they have to take that baby somewhere during the day, daycare doctor, babysitter. Babies don't just vanish for 8 hours while their parents play the grieving family. Jake studied the map doubtfully. And what exactly are you hoping to find? The truth about that baby, I said, and hopefully the identity of MT. Mrs. Chen, who'd been quietly washing dishes, finally spoke up. There's a private investigator in town who owes me a favor. Professional, discreet, very good at following people without being seen. I can't involve anyone else in this, I protested. Honey, Mrs. Chen said, drying her hands on a dish towel, you're way past being able to handle this alone. These people tried to kill you. They're not going to hesitate to try again if they find out you're alive. She was right, of course. Hiring a private investigator meant expanding the circle of people who knew my secret. What kind of favor does this investigator owe you? Mrs. Chen smiled mysteriously. The kind where my grandson didn't go to jail for something stupid he did at 22. PI's name is Danny Crawford. Former cop. Very reliable. Excellent at making problems disappear. Oh. By noon, I was sitting in Danny Crawford's cramped office above a sandwich shop in downtown Ventura, telling my story for the 3rd time in a week. He was about 50, prematurely gray, with the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing. So, you want me to follow your son and daughter-in-law, find out about this mysterious baby, and identify their co-conspirator? He summarized when I finished. That's right. And you're paying me with what? According to the papers, all your assets are frozen pending probate. I slid an envelope across his desk. Cash. Robert always insisted we keep liquid funds hidden for emergencies. Danny flipped through the bills, enough to cover 2 weeks of surveillance, and nodded. I'll need photos and addresses. I handed over everything, my notes, the photos from my break-in. He studied them carefully, pausing on the document signed MT. This handwriting looks familiar, he murmured, pulling out a magnifying glass. Professional, but distinctive. Mind if I run this through some databases? Danny asked, turning the document over in his hand. Do whatever you need, I said, standing to leave. One more thing, he added. If these people are as dangerous as you say, we need a safety protocol. You check in with me every 12 hours. If I don't hear from you, I take everything to the police. Oh. I agreed, though I prayed it wouldn't come to that. The less official involvement, the better, at least until I understood exactly what Adrian and Isabella had done. That afternoon, back at Mrs. Chen's, I waited and planned. For the first time since the yacht, I felt something like steadiness. I had real help now, professional help, and within 24 hours I would know exactly who had tried to kill me and why. Danny Crawford earned every dollar. By the end of the 2nd day, he had more intelligence on Adrian and Isabella than I'd gathered in a lifetime of raising them. He spread a row of photographs across Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. Your son's been very busy since you allegedly died, Danny said. Multiple meetings with lawyers, 2 visits to the bank, and 3 separate trips to a private medical facility in Orange County. Medical facility? Whitmore Reproductive Services. Very exclusive, very expensive, very discreet. He tapped a photo of Adrian and Isabella entering a sleek glass building. They specialize in surrogacy arrangements for wealthy clients who want to keep everything quiet. The pieces clicked together, forming a picture that made my stomach turn. They bought a baby, I whispered. Looks like it, Danny said grimly. And not just any baby. They specifically requested a newborn who could pass as their biological child. According to my contact at Whitmore, the arrangements were made 8 months ago, paid in cash, with instructions for a pre-prepared birth certificate. Mrs. Chen set down 3 cups of coffee and joined us. So they planned your death, bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and had someone inside your financial team helping them. About that, Danny said, sliding over another photo. I think I found MT. The image showed a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and an expensive briefcase, shaking Adrian's hand outside a downtown law office. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Miranda Torres, Danny explained. Partner at Morrison. Torres, associate is. Estate planning for Boston's elite. Torres, I echoed. Wait, Michael Torres is my accountant. They're married, Danny said. And here's where it gets interesting. I met her about 6 months ago, I said slowly, trying to summon the memory. At some charity gala Adrian dragged me to in Malibu, Miranda Torres was very attentive. She kept asking about my estate plan, my trusts. I'll bet she was, Danny said, because Miranda Torres runs a very specific business model. She identifies elderly clients with significant assets and strained family ties, then helps those families accelerate their inheritance through what she calls compassionate intervention. You mean murder? Mrs. Chen said bluntly. I mean, Danny corrected, she creates legal frameworks that allow families to take control of assets while the elder is still alive using claims of incompetence, dementia, diminished capacity. She's done it at least 6 times in the past 3 years. He spread out more photographs on Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. Surveillance shots of Miranda meeting different families, walking into glass-walled law offices, visiting private clinics. She's running a whole operation, Danny continued, finds wealthy seniors with greedy relatives, orchestrates evidence of mental decline, provides legal cover for asset transfers, and takes a healthy cut. And if the senior resists, they have accidents. Boating mishaps, falls, medication overdoses. Always tragic, always plausible, and always financially convenient. My stomach turned. This wasn't just about my fortune. This was a predatory system aimed at people like me. How many people has she killed? I whispered. That I can prove? None. That I suspect? A dozen in the last 5 years. She's very good at covering her tracks, and she only works with families who can supply plausible alibis. We have to stop her, I said. We will, Danny promised. But first we need to understand exactly what Adrian and Isabella have already put in motion. According to my sources, they filed preliminary probate papers yesterday. He pulled a legal folder from his briefcase. They're claiming you died intestate, no valid will, making them your sole heirs. They're also claiming any estate documents you signed are invalid because you were mentally incompetent. But I have a will, I said. I know, Danny replied. I found it. He opened the folder. My familiar will, my supposed signature at the bottom, but the text was completely different from what I remembered signing. They replaced it, I whispered, scanning the forged document. This leaves everything to Adrian, with provisions for any future children, including the baby they just acquired through Whitmore Reproductive Services. I stood and walked to Mrs. Chen's window, staring out at the dark Pacific. A week ago, I'd been a 70-year-old widow trying to hold together some semblance of family with my only son. Now I was a murder victim who had survived her own assassination attempt, uncovering that Adrian wasn't just greedy, he was enmeshed in a criminal enterprise targeting the elderly. There's something else, Danny said quietly. I turned to face him. The birth mother, he said. Her name was Sarah Collins, 17, a runaway from Maine, no family, no support system. Miranda Torres found her at a shelter in Portland and offered her $50,000 to carry a baby for a loving couple. Where is she now? Danny's expression hardened. According to the medical records, she died from complications during delivery, but a nurse at Whitmore remembers her healthy girl, normal pregnancy, no risk factors until the day she gave birth. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They killed her, I whispered. I think so, Danny said, but I can't prove it yet. He began gathering the photographs into a neat pile. What I can prove is that your son and daughter-in-law are part of a criminal organization systematically murdering elderly people for their money. And tomorrow morning they're meeting with Miranda Torres to finalize the legal transfer of your assets. I sat back down, mind racing. Where? Torres's downtown office, 10 a.m. I looked at Mrs. Chen, then at Danny, then at the photo spread showing my son smiling beside a woman who orchestrated death as if it were estate planning. Then I guess it's time for Vivian Mercer to rise from the dead. The hardest part about planning your return from the dead is deciding who gets the shock first. I could confront Adrian and Isabella privately, give them a chance to explain, but that assumed they deserved one. Or I could make my resurrection public, let them discover I was alive with the rest of the world. I chose option 3, strategic haunting. You want to what? Danny asked. I want them to know I'm alive, I said, but not know how much I know. I want them scared, off balance, making mistakes. Mrs. Chen nodded. Psychological warfare, I like it. While Adrian, Isabella, and Miranda Torres met downtown to divide up my assets, I would begin making my presence known in more subtle ways. Danny had found that the baby was kept at Adrian's house during the day with a private nurse, Carol Peterson, hired through one of Miranda's front companies. The woman had no idea she was caring for a child essentially purchased through the death of its teenage mother. And that was only the beginning. If you want to see how I turned the tables on Adrian, Isabella, and Miranda Torres, make sure you hit subscribe, because the next part will show you just how far a dead woman can go for justice. Carol's a good person, Danny had assured me after running a background check. Single mom, nursing degree, clean record. She probably thinks she's helping a legitimate family with childcare. Then she deserves to know the truth, I said. That morning, while Adrian and Isabella were downtown trying to legally erase me from existence, I stood on the front porch of my former Bel Air home and rang the doorbell. Carol Peterson was younger than I'd imagined, mid-30s, with tired eyes and a kind of unguarded warmth. She opened the door holding a baby bottle, scrubs patterned with cartoon whales. Can I help you? She asked. Hello, Carol, I said. My name is Vivian Mercer. I believe you're caring for my grandson. The blood drained from her face. She knew that name. It had been plastered across headlines all week, the wealthy widow lost at sea. You're dead? Yes. I've been reading about that, I said dryly. Fascinating story, though not entirely accurate. I smiled gently. May I come in? I think we need to talk. She stepped back, staring as though she truly was seeing a ghost. But you died. In the papers, on the news, your son said. My son said a lot of things. I cut in softly. Not all of them true. I followed her into the living room, my living room once upon a time, where a baby sat in a bouncy seat, gurgling. Oh, I breathed, seeing the infant for the first time. Oh, you beautiful thing. He was perfect, perhaps 3 weeks old, dark hair, solemn brown eyes. He wore an expensive little outfit, surrounded by high-end baby gear worth thousands. What's his name? I asked, kneeling beside the seat. Baby Mercer, Carol said automatically, then flushed. I mean, they said his name would be Robert Sarah Mercer, after his grandfather, but they haven't decided yet. They haven't decided, I said quietly, because they don't know him well enough to name him, because he isn't really their baby, is he? Carol sank onto the sofa. I don't understand. You're supposed to be dead. They're supposed to be grieving parents who just needed help. Carol, listen carefully. My voice steadied. This baby is not Adrian and Isabella's biological child. They purchased him through an illegal surrogacy arrangement that cost his birth mother her life, and they tried to murder me 6 days ago to steal my inheritance and raise this child as their heir. That's impossible, she whispered. I opened my bag and laid out the photos Danny had taken, the documents I'd copied from Adrian's home office, the evidence of Miranda Torres's criminal operation across the coffee table between us. I laid everything out on the coffee table, watching Carol's expression shift from disbelief to dawning horror as the scope of the scheme became clear. The teenage girl who gave birth to this baby was named Sarah Collins, I said gently. She was 17, no family, no support system. Miranda Torres found her in a Portland shelter and promised her $50,000 to help a loving couple who couldn't have children. She died during delivery under very suspicious circumstances. Carol's eyes brimmed. She looked at the baby with a new understanding. He's an orphan, she whispered. Yes, and if Adrian and Isabella get away with this, he'll grow up thinking they're his parents, never knowing his real mother died to give him life. What do you want me to do? I want you to take pictures, Document everything how they treat him, what they've told you, who else comes and goes. And then I want you to help me make sure this baby grows up knowing the truth about where he came from." Carol wiped her eyes and nodded. "His real name should be Robert Sarah Mercer," she murmured, "after his grandfather and his birth mother." "That's perfect." I spent an hour with Carol and baby Robert Sarah, taking photos, documenting the setup in my former home, and outlining what would happen next. Carol agreed to continue caring for him while secretly gathering evidence and feeding me updates about Adrian and Isabella's activities. "They'll be back around noon," she told me as I prepared to leave. "They always come home for lunch, make phone calls, handle business." "Oh, perfect," I said. By then, they'd have received my first message. While I'd been talking to Carol, Danny was busy downtown. Parked across from Miranda Torres's office, telephoto lens in hand, he captured Adrian and Isabella entering, shaking hands over what they thought was my legal death certificate. But the real gift was what Jake had delivered to their lawyer's office while they were in the meeting, a simple note on my own elegant stationery. "Dear Adrian and Isabella, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Robert Sarah. He's beautiful." Delivered at 11:47 a.m. sharp. Danny watched as all three bolted from the building within minutes, faces white with panic. The psychological warfare had begun. And that afternoon, when they returned to my former house, expecting their conspiracy to be intact, they'd find their dead victim had been very busy indeed. Because I wasn't just alive, I was furious. I was armed with evidence, and I was ready for war. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, positioned directly in sight of the front door of what had once been my home. When Adrian and Isabella walked in from their downtown meeting with Miranda Torres, I was the first thing they saw. The look on their faces was worth every sleepless night and every hour of fear. "Hello, darlings," I said pleasantly, not rising. "How was your meeting? I hope you didn't sign anything too important while I was away." Isabella screamed, an unrestrained, guttural sound, like she'd come face to face with her worst nightmare. Adrian froze in the doorway, keys in hand, staring at me as if I might vanish if he blinked. "Surprised?" I asked. I must say, the reports of my death were terribly premature, though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. Alzheimer's donations? That was a nice touch. At that moment, Carol stepped out from the kitchen, carrying baby Robert Sarah as we'd planned. "Mrs. Mercer asked me to bring the baby out," she said nervously. She wanted to meet her grandson properly. "Her grandson?" Isabella's voice cracked. She jabbed a finger toward me. "Carol, this woman is dead?" I supplied cheerfully. "Yes, I know. We covered that. Turns out drowning is trickier than it looks, especially when good people pull you out of the water." Adrian finally found his voice. "Mom, the Coast Guard searched." "The Coast Guard searched for debris," I interrupted, "not survivors. Interesting how that works when no one reports an actual person overboard." I reached for the baby. Carol handed him over without hesitation. I nestled him in my arms, looking into those serious brown eyes. "Hello, little Robert Sarah," I whispered. "I'm your real grandmother, not the kind who buys you with blood money." "His name isn't Robert Sarah," Isabella snapped, some composure returning. "His name is whatever we decide. He's our son." "Is he?" I asked quietly. "Tell me, Isabella, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago on that yacht you didn't look like someone recovering from childbirth." The birth was private." "Yes," I cut in. "Very private. So private that the actual mother, Sarah Collins, 17 years old, from Maine died under mysterious circumstances. Did you even bother to learn her name?" "No family to ask questions when she disappeared," I said quietly. The silence in the room was deafening. Carol gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible," Adrian muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Never what?" I asked softly, still holding the baby. "Never conspire with Miranda Torres to run an illegal surrogacy? Never systematically poison an elderly woman's reputation to steal her fortune? Never push your own mother off a yacht and leave her for dead? Which part exactly would you never do, Adrian?" Isabella recovered first, her shock turning to that cool calculation I'd seen on the yacht. "Prove it. You can make all the accusations you want, but proving any of it is another matter entirely. I seconded. Oh, darling, I said, smiling for the first time since they'd walked in. You really shouldn't have said that. Carol, I said without taking my eyes off them, would you mind taking Robert Sarah to his room for his nap? The grown-ups need to have a conversation. Carol hesitated only a second before retreating with the baby. I walked to the mantel, noticing how Adrian had arranged the family photos. None of me. My jaw tightened. Sit down, I ordered, my voice carrying the authority that once ran Robert's household staff. Both of you. They obeyed. Still shell-shocked. Let me tell you what I've been doing for the past week while you've been planning my funeral and dividing up my assets. I reached behind the chair cushion and pulled out a thick manila folder. I've been investigating, learning, documenting. Oh. I spread Danny's photographs across the coffee table, Adrian and Isabella with Miranda Torres, multiple visits to Whitmore Reproductive Services, financial documents showing the cash payments for the baby. This is Miranda Torres, I said, pointing to one shot. She specializes in helping families like you accelerate their inheritances through what she calls compassionate intervention. In plain English, she helps greedy relatives kill the elderly for their money. That's ridiculous, Isabella said, but her eyes flicked across the photos with growing alarm. Is it? I asked, pulling out another set of documents. Because I have proof of at least 6 other cases where Miranda Torres provided cover, 6 other accidents later proven to be induced. I laid out a case file. Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, 73, pushed toward sedatives by her son, inherited $2 million. Mr. Charles Bennett, 68, killed in a single-car accident after his daughter altered his meds, inherited $4 million. Adrian had gone very pale. I looked straight at Adrian. These aren't theories, son. These are murders, and you're part of the same operation. We never killed anyone, Isabella said quickly. Even if what you're saying about this Torres woman is true, we never actually hurt anyone. Really? I asked, my voice like ice. What about Sarah Collins, the 17-year-old whose baby you bought, the girl who died under suspicious circumstances? The girl whose death gave you the air cover you needed to inherit my fortune. That wasn't we didn't know, Adrian started, then faltered. Didn't know what? I pressed. That Miranda Torres was running a black market baby operation using vulnerable teenagers? Didn't know those girls had a habit of dying during delivery? Didn't know you were accessories to murder? I pulled out another document, Sarah's death certificate, which Danny had obtained through his contacts. Cause of death: unexpected cardiac arrest during delivery. But according to the nurse who was present, Sarah was healthy, showing no distress right up until she stopped breathing. Carol had returned, standing silently in the doorway, eyes wide. That same nurse, I continued, told my investigator that Miranda Torres was present during the delivery and that she personally administered a routine medication just minutes before Sarah went into cardiac arrest. Your investigator? Adrian whispered. Oh yes, I said. Did you think I was handling this alone? I have a private investigator, surveillance photos, financial records, medical documents, and testimony from multiple sources. I smiled coldly. And I also have something else. I walked to what used to be Robert's desk and opened the top drawer, pulling out a small digital recorder. I've been recording this entire conversation, every word you've said, every admission you've made, every piece of evidence you've confirmed. In California, only one party needs to consent to a recording, and since this is my home, I think I qualify. Isabella jumped to her feet. You can't use that in court. It's entrapment or something. Actually, I said evenly, it's evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder, evidence that will put you both in prison for a very long time. Adrian finally found his voice. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed a sound with no warmth. I want my money back. I want that baby properly adopted by a family who will love him and tell him the truth. I want Miranda Torres arrested for the predator she is, and I want you both to spend the rest of your lives remembering that you tried to murder your own mother for money. If we cooperate? Isabella asked faintly. If you cooperate, I said, I might consider not pressing charges for attempted murder. The fraud, the conspiracy, the accessory to murder, those are out of my hands now. But attempted murder was still my choice to press. I looked at both of them, these two people who had eaten at my table, slept under my roof, celebrated holidays with me, and who had planned my death with the same casual efficiency most people use to plan a weekend getaway. "You have 24 hours to decide," I said evenly. They chose poorly. Instead of confessing or cooperating, instead of showing even a flicker of remorse, Adrian and Isabella doubled down. I found out at 6 the next morning, when Danny Crawford rang Mrs. Chen's old landline at the bed and breakfast with an urgent warning. "They're moving fast," he said without preamble. "I've been monitoring their communications. They spent all night on the phone with Miranda Torres and someone else they kept referring to as the cleaner." I was instantly awake. "What kind of cleaner?" "The kind who makes problems disappear permanently," Danny said grimly. "They're planning to have you killed again, and this time they want to make sure the body is found, so there's no question about your death." Mrs. Chen, listening from the kitchen doorway, immediately began making calls. Within 15 minutes, Jake Morales was at our door with his pickup, and we were evacuating to a safe house Danny had arranged. "How much time do we have?" I asked as we sped through the pre-dawn streets of Ventura. "Not much. The cleaner they hired is flying in from New York this morning. According to my source, he specializes in making murders look like accidents. Perfect success rate." The safe house was a small cedar-sided cottage on a private island just off the California coast, accessible only by boat. Jake knew the owner, another fisherman who owed him favors and didn't ask questions. We reached it as the sun was coming up over the Pacific. "This is insane," I said, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to process what was happening. "My own son hired a professional killer to murder me." "People do terrible things for money," Jake said grimly, "but we're not going to let them get away with it." An hour later, Danny arrived, face taut, and spread photographs and documents across the table. "It's worse than we thought. Miranda Torres isn't just running a murder for inheritance scheme. She's part of a larger network. I've identified at least 20 suspicious deaths over 5 years, all wealthy seniors, all ruled accidental. They've got people inside the system. Examiners, detectives, probate judges. This isn't a family hustle. It's organized crime with a very specific target demographic." Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on coming despite the danger, leaned over the photos, her sharp eyes narrowing. "This woman here," she said, tapping a surveillance shot. "I've seen her before," Mrs. Chen murmured, leaning closer to a grainy surveillance shot. "Where?" I asked. "At the hospital where I volunteer. She came about 6 months ago, asking questions about elderly patients who didn't have family visitors, claimed she was from some kind of social services agency." Danny and I exchanged a grim look. "She was scouting for targets," he said. "And now they're coming after you," Jake added quietly, "because you're the first person who survived their operation and can testify about what they do. Then we need to make sure my testimony is heard before they have a chance to silence me." I spent the rest of the morning writing everything down, every detail of Adrian and Isabella's betrayal, every name, date, and transaction connected to Miranda Torres's operation. If something happened to me, at least the truth would survive. Around noon, Danny's phone rang. He stepped outside, returned pale. "They found the cleaner," he said. "Dead in his hotel room, single gunshot to the head. Professional execution." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means Miranda Torres is cleaning house. Anyone who can connect her to the murder network is being eliminated, including potentially your son and daughter-in-law." The thought of Adrian being murdered should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a cold, surprising satisfaction. "Good," I said. "Let them find out what it feels like to be betrayed by someone they trusted." Jake shook his head. "You don't understand, Vivian. If Torres is eliminating witnesses, that includes you, but it also includes that baby. An orphaned infant with no legal guardians is a loose end she can't afford." My blood ran cold. "Robert Serra. She'll have him killed too, make it look like a tragic accident. Carbon monoxide leak, house fire, something that erases the evidence along with the witness." I stood so quickly my coffee spilled. "We have to get him. It's too dangerous. They'll be watching your old house, waiting for you to show up." "Then I'll give them what they're waiting for," I said. The plan was simple, which made it terrifying. I would surrender myself to Adrian and Isabella, let them think they'd won, and trust Danny and Jake to be in position to rescue both me and baby Robert Serra when Miranda Torres arrived to clean house. "This is the stupidest plan I've ever heard," Mrs. Chen muttered as we loaded gear into Jake's boat. "It's the only way to save that baby," I replied, checking the hidden recording devices Danny had given me, and to get enough evidence to bring down Torres's entire operation. Oh, Danny was already monitoring communications. Miranda Torres was driving up from New York, planning to arrive at my former house by evening. Adrian and Isabella had been told to have me there, alive, so Torres could question me before arranging my final accident. They think I'm going to trade my life for the baby, I told Jake as his boat nosed toward the Gloucester dock. They have no idea I've been planning this for days. Ugh. The recording devices were already in place, tiny things Carol had hidden in lamp bases and smoke detectors, cameras tucked behind potted palms and picture frames, while Adrian and Isabella were out polishing the last pieces of their plan with Miranda Torres. Carol would be in the basement with baby Robert Sarah, clutching him close and ready to slip out the old servant's entrance if the worst happened. "You sure about this?" Jake asked as we reached the dock, morning fog still lifting off the water. "I'm sure that if I don't, an innocent baby will die because of my son's greed," I said. I could feel my hands steady in a way they hadn't since the yacht. That was not something I could live with. I walked up the path to my former front door at exactly 6 o'clock. The porch light clicked on, the key in my hand felt familiar and strangely right. Adrian opened the door, and for one terrible, tender moment, I heard the child I knew in his voice. "Mom," he said, and it sounded like the boy who once wanted to show me his school projects. "Hello, Adrian," I said simply. "I'm here, as promised." Isabella paced in the living room, eyes darting as if the room itself threatened to collapse. "She'll be here soon," she said without looking at me. "Miranda Torres, she wants to talk to you." "She does." I kept my voice calm. "Adrian, you never wanted this to go this far, did you?" "You let it," I said. "You let it go this far because $3 billion was worth more to you than your mother's life." He couldn't meet my eyes. Miranda Torres arrived at 7 on the dot. Smaller than I imagined, neat as a courtroom, coiffed and efficient. She extended a hand like a hostess at a fundraiser. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm so relieved you survived your accident," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We have much to discuss." She sat, opened a leather portfolio, and began as if reading from a business memo. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble for my clients," she said. Adrian and Isabella followed my instructions precisely, and yet here you are very much alive and very much informed. "Murder concerns me," I said, "especially when it's my own." She tilted her head, as if pitying me for my bluntness. "I prefer to call it estate planning acceleration," she said smoothly. "We help families access inheritances that would otherwise be tied up in probate. We provide a compassionate end to those whose continued existence creates hardship." "Hardship?" I echoed. "You rationalize killing as compassion?" She consulted her portfolio like an executive checking a schedule. "Over the past 5 years, my clients and I have resolved 37 cases where an elderly relative's continued presence created financial or emotional strain." She pronounced the last word with clinical precision. 37 resolved cases. The room felt smaller. My pulse hammered. 37. The number sat between us like a verdict. I looked at Adrian and Isabella, at the faces that had once been family, and understood with a cold, slow certainty how deep the rot went. She was confessing to 37 murders as if they were tax returns she'd filed. "And you're planning to make me number 38? I asked. Miranda Torres's lips curved in that professional smile. "Oh, Mrs. Mercer, I'm afraid you'd be number 39. We had to resolve another matter earlier today, a gentleman who'd grown too curious. But yes, you will need another accident. A more permanent one this time." "And the baby?" My voice sharpened. "A tragic carbon monoxide leak," she said smoothly. "These old California houses' faulty heating systems can be so dangerous." "Oh." I turned to Adrian and Isabella, who sat rigid on the sofa, like mannequins. "This is what you wanted? Not just my death, but the death of an innocent child?" Neither spoke. "The baby is a loose end," Torres continued matter-of-factly. "His existence complicates the inheritance. Much simpler to eliminate him now and claim Adrian and Isabella are tragically childless, deserving of sympathy and wealth." That was when I smiled for the first time since she'd entered my home. "Miss Torres," I said pleasantly, "there's something you should know." "And what is that?" she asked. "You're under arrest." The words had barely left my mouth when the doors burst open. FBI agents stormed in from every entry point: front, back, basement, even the windows. They had been listening to every word, recording Miranda Torres's confession to 37 murders and her plan to add 2 more. Miranda Torres. Agent Sarah Chan announced. Badge raised. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. Torres bolted for the kitchen, perhaps hoping for a back exit. She made it 6 feet before 3 agents tackled her to the hardwood floor. Adrian and Isabella sat frozen, eyes wide, as Agent Chan read them their rights. Vivian Mercer, Chan said, turning to me with a rare smile. That was extremely dangerous and extremely well done. Oh. It turned out Danny Crawford wasn't merely a private investigator. He was a former FBI agent working undercover to dismantle Torres's elder abuse network. My case had provided the perfect trap. We'd tracked her for 2 years, Agent Chan explained as the house filled with crime scene techs. But she was too careful, always using intermediaries, never touching the crimes herself, until today. Until today, I echoed, when she confessed to 37 murders on federal recording equipment. Carol Peterson emerged from the basement carrying baby Robert Sarah, unharmed. Is it over? She asked. It's over, I said, taking the child into my arms. At least the dangerous part is over. The legal part would take months. Adrian and Isabella were charged with conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and accessory to murder in the death of Sarah Collins. They both took plea deals, 25 years for Adrian, 20 for Isabella. Miranda Torres refused to bargain, went to trial, and was convicted on every count. She is now serving life in federal prison without parole. The network she built unraveled within a year. 17 other conspirators were arrested, corrupt medical examiners, probate lawyers, even relatives who had orchestrated the deaths of their own parents. The investigation revealed they had stolen over $200 million from elderly victims across 6 states. But the most important outcome wasn't the money. It was baby Robert Sarah. I petitioned for adoption with the full support of the courts and Sarah Collins' extended family, who were traced to Nova Scotia. They were grateful that someone would raise Sarah's child and make sure he knew the truth. In court, I explained his full name. Robert Sarah Mercer. Robert for his grandfather. Sarah for his birth mother. And Mercer, because that is the family that will love him and raise him in truth. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had followed the case closely, signed the order with tears in her eyes. I think Sarah Collins would be proud, she said. I'm 75 now. 5 years have passed, and Robert Sarah is a remarkable boy who knows exactly where he came from. He knows his birth mother was a brave teenager who wanted him to live. He knows his adoptive father and stepmother tried to use him in a scheme that cost Sarah her life. And he knows that sometimes the people who should love you most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. Mrs. Chen still runs her bed and breakfast, though she's added a sideline consulting with seniors who suspect their families might not have their best interests at heart. Jake Morales continues his fishing charters but is something of a legend now, the man who hauled a grandmother out of the Pacific and helped bring down a criminal empire. And Danny Crawford, or rather, Agent Crawford, still works with the FBI. Every Christmas he sends me a card with photos of other seniors whose lives he's helped protect. Adrian still writes me letters from prison, full of explanations and pleas for forgiveness. I don't write back. Because here's what I learned in the week I spent as a dead woman. Family isn't about blood or inheritance. It's about showing up, protecting the vulnerable, and choosing love over greed. Robert and I have that kind of family now. The kind where no one gets pushed off boats, no one forges wills, and no one dies for someone else to get rich. It's a far better family than the one I was born into, and infinitely better than the one I raised. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear from you. If you believe I made the right choice fighting back, leave me a comment below. Your support means more than you know. Life has taught me one simple truth. Family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when it matters. Protect the vulnerable, stand firm against betrayal, and never let greed define your worth. Choose love, dignity, and truth every single day.